Hello. Ezra struggled with the dark side after encountering Maul on the planet of Malachor. What if Ezra Bridger joined Darth Maul? How would he handle the teachings of an experienced Sith? Would his path forever be corrupted? Or would he find a sense of balance again? Special thanks to Artsavers for sponsoring our 75,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. All the details are in the pinned comment down below. Our story begins on the return to Chopper Base after the incident on Malachor. The ancient Sith weapon was destroyed, with it, the death of Ahsoka Tano and the possible death of Darth Vader. It was unknown at this point. Maul was nowhere to be seen, and Ezra felt immense guilt. Kanan was blinded by Maul, who betrayed him, and Ahsoka had seemingly died because of Ezra. All the pressure and failure mounted up on him. 15 years old, and he caused his master to be blinded. Kanan would never be able to see Hera again, and now he was without one of his primary senses. When they returned to Chopper Base, he helped Kanan off the Phantom and watched Hera take Kanan into her arms. Ezra was then shifted into a total shame when Rex walked out from the base to see his friends, only to notice that one of them hadn't returned. Rex looked at Ezra, and the shame on Ezra's face told the entire story. The blinding guilt had Ezra returning to the Ghost and to his room, where he was pained with the travesty of his own failures. The terror in his heart led him to consult the dark side. Kanan was absent for days, and Ezra was left with the Sith holocron he took on Malachor. He remembered what Maul said about the artifact and that it could give him power, and so Ezra opened it, and he felt the reward of the dark side. It was a power trip, a leech if you will, something that gave short-term relief but long-term suffering. Ezra believed that if he consulted the dark side for its power, then he could manipulate the events of the future into his favor. 15 years old, how else was he not to believe that could happen? With limited lessons in the light and seeing how powerful he was with the dark, he began to romanticize the incident on Malachor. Ezra saw what Maul taught him in their short stint together. The dark side opened up Ezra to what he could truly become. It was the nature of it. To receive power, one had to surrender themselves to the dark side. So that's what he did, learning all he could from the Sith holocron, taking in all it had to offer. He justified his exposure to the dark side because he believed that in learning from its variety of powers, he could be able to save his friends from what happened before. That's all Ezra wanted to do. He wanted to protect his friends, Hera, Chopper, Sabine, Zeb, Kanan, and Rex. He wanted to be a great help to the Alliance, but how could he if he relinquished his power by abstaining to the light? He only needed more power to protect those he cared about. That much made sense to him. Kanan never blamed Ezra for the incident on the other hand. Truthfully, he blamed himself. In his own heart, he saw it as his own failure to be the best teacher he could be for Ezra in the moment. He could have prepared Ezra for the situation more. He could have explained things in a better way. The main point being is he never held it against his student. Though because Kanan was often outside the Ghost sitting on the outskirts of the base and meditating, he never really explained it to Ezra. Kanan became a ghost and his presence was lost amongst everyone, including Hera. She understood that blindness was hard for him and that he felt like he could no longer contribute to the cause, but she didn't believe that. Though she hadn't realized how much Ezra was struggling. She was the general of this operation, and while she could very easily be considered the mom of the group, she had greater responsibilities to the survival and the growth of the rebellion. A lot of help had been funneled over in the years, and with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma as large contributors, she needed to make sure the rebels continued to spread positive messages. The issues on Aldhani and Ferrix were stoking the flames of rebellion, and she knew that this was a beginning for the rebellion and the Alliance. Regardless, Ezra was beginning to receive messages from the Force, though it wasn't as shaded as that. The voice was familiar, someone he would know. It was Maul. The two of them created a forced bond on Malachor. This is simply because the two of them had to play master and apprentice to access the interior of the Sith temple. Now, they were connected. They would stay that way until one of them or both of them died. Ezra didn't know this, but Maul did, and because he was a loner and struggling with his solitude, nothing would make the aging Sith happier than to have an ally or a friend at the very least. So he began reaching out to Ezra, the same way his master would have. Maul did, after all, learn from the best manipulator in the galaxy, and so he told Ezra that he could give him all the information to save his friends. The first few times Ezra was very reluctant, but after a mission that didn't go as well as he would have liked, he took the bait, and in the middle of the night, stealing an X-Wing and departing for a world he never heard of. Ezra arrived over a red planet in a location far from Talon. He pulled the X-Wing down and followed the forest to a small forest, and at the end of the forest was a dark cave. Ezra turned on the lights on the X-Wing and flashed the cave before landing, and pulling out his newly constructed lightsaber. Ezra had constructed a lightsaber since Malachor, this time containing a green crystal. He ignited the weapon and steadied himself forward. A voice echoed out from the cave, telling Ezra that they need not be adversaries. The young Jedi was kind of annoyed with this, but Maul seemed to have no issue with approaching Ezra without a weapon. Truthfully, since using the Sith holocron, he had become angrier and less patient, so he would continue that lack of patience here with Maul. He wasn't about to let him play a game on him again. He wasn't going to turn to the dark side, and he wouldn't become corrupted. Maul told Ezra that he had no intention of corrupting him. His biggest intention was to help Ezra help his friends. Maul turned around and told the boy to follow him. Ezra was sporting a new haircut at this time, and Maul simply complimented him on how much he had seemingly grown up. Ezra wasn't really interested in the conversation, but he deignited his lightsaber and followed Maul. If Maul could help him with helping his friends and keeping them safe, then it would make up for what Maul did to Kanan. But not really. Ezra at this point had decided that he wouldn't join Maul, no matter what. He was only here for information, yet Maul didn't really quite see it that way. As morning came in Chopper Base, after Hera and Zeb spent all night trying to figure out who had stolen the X-Wing, they were shocked and heartbroken to learn that Ezra was nowhere to be seen. It's not like Ezra was a late riser either. He was always up early, and he typically tried to be as ready as he could to try and help out. It sometimes came off like he was trying to make up for his failures, but they always appreciated the dedication to the rebellion. With him gone, worry filled the camp. His location was off and they couldn't be able to track him. This led Hera to having a stern conversation with Kanan, who hadn't yet woken up. He was terribly upset about Ezra's disappearance, and both Kanan and Hera realized that maybe they drove him from Chopper Base by neglecting him. While they obviously weren't parents at this point, it was a role they accepted, and in the Ghost family, Ezra was their youngest. It felt like he was gone because they had neglected him. Of course, no one could know why he had disappeared, but it felt like he was running away. Their hope was that on his journeys he wouldn't be picked up by the Empire or the dark side. They only hoped for his safety and wished for the day that he returned, especially being that there were no signs, well, not really any signs, leading up to his disappearance. On Dathomir, Ezra and Maul sat at a table that formerly belonged to Mother Talzin, and before her, Old Daka. Ezra was short with his words, but Maul was not, consistently speaking and maneuvering his words to draw Ezra in closer and closer to him. It was kind of working. The manipulative genius that Palpatine was passed down to his apprentice, and it was weaving its way into Ezra. Maul then began a series of lies to corrupt Ezra, suggesting that he never wanted to hurt Kanan, but Kanan attacked him, so instead of killing him, he blinded him because he didn't want to hurt Ezra. Ezra never heard of this, and it did sound pretty fair. In all fairness, Kanan had been really negative about Maul, and it's possible he tried to attack him. It could explain why Kanan never spoke about the incident since the return. Something about this didn't sit right with Ezra, but how could he deny it? Kanan never spoke about it, and Ezra was left to assume what had happened. Now, he had an answer from Maul. And while in his gut it didn't sit right, it was still the only answer he'd been given in the months since Malachor. Ezra, being 16, had to accept it. Because of this confusion, Maul told Ezra that together they can unlock everything they needed if only they worked together. Maul asked Ezra if he brought the Jedi holocron, and he nodded his head. He wasn't thrilled about bringing the holocrons, but what choice did he have? He was instructed by Maul to bring them, and so he left them in the X-Wing in case Maul attempted to kill him. Maul told Ezra to go grab them, and together they can unlock the answers to the secrets they desired. Ezra asked Maul about being able to destroy the Sith. This is where Maul twisted the dagger to manipulate the boy. He told Ezra that what Ezra wanted was exactly what he wanted. His friends may have called Maul a Sith, but as he explained, he wasn't a Sith. He simply used the dark side. Ezra had never heard of that. His assumption was that it was black and white, the Jedi and the Sith. This wasn't on Kanan as a teacher, more so the fact that all Ezra saw was the Jedi or the Inquisitors with the rare appearance of Vader, and of course Ahsoka. Maul continued telling Ezra that he wasn't going to steal him from his friends, he simply wanted to help. Ezra knew there had to be a catch. Maul continued and told Ezra that all he wanted was a friend. His brother was his greatest friend, but he was killed by Sidious long ago. Ezra expressed his condolences, to which Maul told Ezra to bring the holocrons and he would teach him what to do, so they could both get what they respectively wanted and go along their way. Ezra ran back to the ship and grabbed the holocrons, and when he returned, Maul asked for them, gently taking them and setting them down outside of an altar in the middle of the cave. He told Ezra what to do with their small ritual, and they began. They both knelt down across from each other, focusing on the Force. Maul lifted up the Sith holocron and Ezra lifted the Jedi holocron, pulling their pieces apart in midair, and then they moved the two holocrons together, and a streaky voice called out to both of them. They learned the path to destroying the Sith was found on Tatooine, but that wasn't the only thing on Tatooine. What Maul was looking for was also on Tatooine. Ezra had no idea of what Maul was looking for, and because of that, he was, too, surprised when he learned that Maul was also being directed towards Tatooine as well. What could be so important on a planet so far away from the rest of the galaxy? That much was unknown at the moment, but as far as Ezra knew, Maul wasn't ready to leave. To him, this was odd, considering he had such an eagerness to go to Tatooine until he learned that he was meant to go to Tatooine. Maul explained that he was going to go there to hunt an old rival and then he needed Ezra's assistance in defeating him. Ezra asked if this was a Sith Lord, to which he twisted the truth again, telling Ezra that it was more of a man who took everything away from him, hurting his brother and removing his own legs. Ezra expressed his readiness to help, but Maul told him that if his brother struggled against the likes of this opponent, then Ezra would too. They would have to spend an elongated time here working with each other on preparing to fight this adversary. Ezra was very surprised by this, but he abided, listening to every instruction Maul gave him and learning how to use the dark side. With the assistance of the Sith holocron, Ezra would have naturally been propelled further in his training. He now had the added benefit of an experienced dark side user and a man who spent the first half of his life with the greatest Sith Lord the galaxy had ever seen. Sidious wasn't something to simply mock and forget about. Maul would use his past with Sidious to assist Ezra in his training. Because Maul spent time with Savage, he knew how to help a brute establish power in the Force. Ezra wasn't so much a brute, rather light on his feet with previous experience with the Force. There would be one key difference there, but another one on top of that would be that Ezra would be really close to the younger version of himself, if only he was trained properly, of course. Maul couldn't move like he used to, which is why he never challenged Vader. However, he could teach Ezra to move like he used to which he could use to have Ezra kill Kenobi. Maul's long-term hope was to rid the light from Ezra so that when they confronted Obi-Wan, he'd be willing to join him. His plans were so vile that he wanted to be the new Sith Lord, to rip Sidious from his pinnacle of power and replace it with himself and Ezra by his side. And while Maul wanted nothing more to have a friend by his side, he would sacrifice that for what he deemed power, like how he sacrificed Savage and the Death Watch for Mandalore and Crimson Dawn. But maybe he could learn a lesson from both instances, the lesson being that maybe throwing people down in front of him for what he wanted would only bring him failure. After all, Mandalore fell a year after he captured it, and Crimson Dawn fell 9 years after successfully building up a criminal organization. Time would tell. He would continue the plan while he trained his young student. It turned out that Ezra was especially locked into the dark side. He was very easily influenced by it, mostly because he gained a lot of power from it. For the time Ezra spent with Maul, Kanan was on the other hand spending as much time as he could outside of Chopper Base. He did have an encounter or two with the Great Bendu and did learn some lessons with him, but Kanan was more so worried about Ezra. He was nowhere to be seen, not on Lothal or any of the other previous worlds they've been on. Kanan and Sabine were looking for him, but the time came where they had to stop. Hera called off the search, hoping that one day he might find his way home. This did come after the rebels had to relocate though, after Grand Admiral Thrawn discovered Chopper Base, the rat in his ranks, and a number of other things. He was currently developing a TIE Defender on Lothal and no one knew about it. The rebellion was fractured after the loss of Chopper Base, and with it, one of the earliest contributors to its success, Commander Sato. It was alright, the rebels were able to relocate to Yavin 4, but it was a costly battle. The rebels didn't get an alert to go to Lothal, but they did discover that Thrawn was spending a lot of time there. As a means to try and see if Ezra was captured, the Ghost crew went to Lothal and found no signs of Ezra, but in his honor they sabotaged the TIE Defender plant that was currently helping Thrawn work on his top secret project. This went over the span of 2 years. Ezra, now 18, and with the rebels back in the hiding spot on Yavin, Lothal had to suffer for what the Ghost crew did to Thrawn's project. Ezra, on the other hand, hadn't realized how much time had passed. He still possessed a green lightsaber, but the color wasn't as vibrant as it was when he first crafted it. He was beyond his years in strength, and with a dark side teacher like Maul, he was shocked to see how far he'd progressed in the short time. Though he still showed some signs of reluctance towards the dark side of the Force. He refused to hurt people out of the kindness in his heart. This is because Ezra was a good person. Now a young man having spent so much time with Maul, one would assume he'd be corrupted. But that was far from the truth. He still held dearly onto his friends, but he just wanted to help them. Both Maul and Ezra in a way were perfect for each other because they both planned on double-crossing the other. More so Ezra than Maul, which is the irony of the situation. The established dark side user wanted friendship, and Ezra was that friend. But Ezra missed his family. He loved the Ghost crew and everyone in it, and he knew Maul would never become that. He was going to help Maul defeat this man on Tatooine, and then Maul would help him fight the Sith. It was a win-win, ridding the galaxy of two evil Force users. Maul at this point believed Ezra was ready. He bathed in revenge for decades, and now the time was upon him. Maul took Vader's former ship, and Ezra took the X-Wing, and they went to Tatooine to find this man. They would be on the desert world for about 19 hours when they came across a campfire in the middle of the sands. Who could this be, and why did he wear the garments of a Jedi Master? Ezra looked at Maul with blood in his eyes, but he waited. He watched to see what would happen. Maul blew the fire out by slashing sand into it with his lightsaber. Maul called Kenobi by his name, and Ezra couldn't believe it. He was being set up to kill a Jedi Master. This put conflict into Ezra's mind. Could he fight Obi-Wan for the sole hope of defeating the Sith with Maul? Part of Ezra wanted to interject. He wanted to kill Maul, or maybe he wanted to kill Kenobi. He knew he wanted to kill someone because killing one of them would set off a chain of events. He stopped. Kenobi hadn't even acknowledged him, and so inversely, Obi-Wan prepared for his fight with Maul exclusively. The duel was shorter than he could have ever imagined. 2 parries and Maul's death. Ezra would never know the significance of this death because he wasn't on Naboo 40 years prior, but for Obi-Wan and Maul it signified the end of where their rivalry began, with the death of Qui-Gon of course. Ezra held his lightsaber in his hands, unsure of what to do. Kenobi caught Maul and placed him on the sands, closing his eyes and turning back to Ezra. The young Jedi was still eager to jump into combat. But was he? Kenobi stood back up and looked at Ezra. He didn't seem surprised by his confused nature. He reached out his hand and told Ezra to take a seat with him. Instead, Ezra ignited his lightsaber. Kenobi didn't budge. He simply looked at the young man and watched. Ezra was taken aback by the calm nature. He knew who Obi-Wan was from the hologram that Kanan had, but did he really want to forfeit who he was? Kenobi lowered his hand and waited for the boy's next move. Obi-Wan shook his head. He told Ezra that this wasn't what he wanted. The lightsaber in Ezra's hand dropped to the ground and fell lifelessly into the sand. Behind it, Ezra's knees slid into the sand and he looked at Obi-Wan with tears in his eyes. It was twilight. A couple tears fled Ezra's eyes and he asked Obi-Wan what he became. He missed his family, they were all he had, and he abandoned them. Kenobi got over to Ezra and knelt down next to him. He comforted the young man, seeing similarities in Ezra to Anakin, Ahsoka, and even Reva, each of them having had their struggles, and this was another case of it. He told Ezra that he was on the proper path now. What he did with what he had is all he could do. If he wanted to go back home, he could. If not, then he was welcome to stay here on Tatooine with him and learn the ways of becoming a Jedi, suggesting that maybe his lightsaber would look a little bit more pure if he did so. Ezra nodded his head. He asked if he left, could he come back? Obi-Wan told him to trust the Force. If he left, then he could come back. However, he might not find him immediately. Ezra understood. His journey would tear his heart into two. Not knowing about any of the galactic events since his disappearance, he came back to Atalon and found Chopper Base decimated. There was no sign of his friends or anything aside from the wreckage. Though his arrival would awaken the cosmic force inside of someone who was referred to himself as a Great Bendu. He was no longer physically alive, but his essence was tied to the planet, and sensing another Force user woke him up from his peace. The conversation would ensue, which only would tear Ezra more. He would learn that his family escaped, but he expressed their deepest sorrows over his disappearance, their fear for his life and what had become of him. Of course, he was so happy to learn that they survived the attack, but his guilt overshadowed everything for him. Ezra would return to Tatooine, and after a couple of days he would find Obi-Wan's hut, and he would be welcomed in. The training Obi-Wan gave him was completely different than the training he got from Maul, because Obi-Wan wasn't concerned with the lightsaber, not until he believed Ezra learned how to control his ambition for power, of course. What Maul taught him was useful in the realm of becoming strong, becoming a powerful Force user if you will. However, the significant difference being is that Ezra was too focused on what he was trying to save rather than what he could do as one person. Obi-Wan told the story in The Fall of Anakin Skywalker, telling him how he once believed he could take on and train a boy like Anakin. That, of course, was fine until Anakin desired more than he could humanly do, believing that as a chosen one he should be able to stop people from dying and save everyone in the galaxy, and that's something that isn't possible. Ezra asked why that was, so Obi-Wan explained it. The Jedi at their peak were an order of 10,000, in a galaxy of around 100 quadrillion sentient beings. The Jedi strive for peace, stopping wars and saving people, but if their mindset was to save everyone, then they couldn't save anyone. Ezra looked a bit confused, and so Kenobi carried on further. He said the Force is always in motion. To be in motion, a user of the Force must trust that what must happen will, even if it's against what they actually want themselves. Obi-Wan expressed that the Jedi would go mad had they believed they could save everyone. Of course, there were layers to the politics the Jedi Council played, but it was absurd to believe they didn't want to help everyone. They'd taken down slaver empires, Sith empires, corrupt criminal rings, criminal empires, and a lot of absurdities that sentients commit to. But they cannot be everywhere at once, so Obi-Wan broke it down to the singular level. While 10,000 Jedi is a lot, so is one Jedi, and Ezra is one Jedi. He made his choices and the living Force was affected by them. He could not burden himself with what is now out of his control, only with what is. Obi-Wan told Ezra that it was a lesson Anakin couldn't learn, so he pleaded that Ezra try to learn it, or he would become what he feared most. The two of them carried on their lessons for weeks before Luke was brought to Obi-Wan's hut with two little droids. Ezra recognized them, and then he learned of what happened to Leia. He was jittery to help her. He met her when he first joined the Ghost crew, when she was sent to Lothal with 3 Hammerhead Corvettes. This great adventure would have Ezra, Luke, and Obi-Wan heading to Mos Eisley and then departing from Tatooine to the wreckage of Alderaan. It was horrific. During the trip through hyperspace, Ezra and Ben both felt it. This was while Luke was training with his lightsaber. Ben explained it, and Ezra asked what it could have been. It wasn't until their arrival at Alderaan when they realized what had happened. As they approached the Death Star, the gravity of the situation fell onto them, and then it became real. While his fate never originally had him seeing the Death Star, there was one advantage to the current path. The Death Star was packed with a number of Imperial officers. Grand Moff Tarkin, Thrawn, Yularen, and Darth Vader was here too. Ezra hadn't come into contact with any of them aside from Vader twice. He wasn't very much so looking forward to another encounter. On the Death Star, they split up. Obi-Wan went to shut down the tractor beam, and the other four went to go save Leia, which went successfully. By the time they prepared to exit the Death Star, Obi-Wan and Vader were in a confrontation. Luke cried out a terrible no, and when he did, the stormtroopers turned around and both Vader and Kenobi stopped. Ezra saw the look in Obi-Wan's eyes, and he couldn't allow it to happen. Running forward, igniting his lightsaber, which distracted Vader, doing a kickflip, and then launching stormtroopers with the Force. Vader was about to swing for Kenobi until two of his men went flying off of their feet and slammed into him. Ezra told Obi-Wan to come with them. He originally planned on sacrificing himself, but there must have been something greater planned for him. He stepped out of the corridor as Vader raised his blade. The blast doors were shot before Vader could get out of the corridor. Kenobi and Ezra got to the Falcon and departed, Han and Chewie flying while Ezra and Luke took 2 different points above and below the ship to defend themselves. Considering the similarity in age, the two of them got along really well. They were able to dispatch the TIE fighters and get to the coordinates of the secret rebel base. When they arrived, Ezra looked around for his friends, but they were nowhere to be seen. But according to Leia, they had survived the Battle of Scarif. At least, that's what she knew up until this point. They didn't have much time. They had to prepare for a counter-assault on the Death Star for when it came into contact with them. With rebels lacking the ships for the ready, Ezra told Luke that he could take the final X-Wing. After all, it's his fault the rebels were down an extra X-Wing. Also, because of Obi-Wan, he knew how good of a pilot Luke's father had been, and how he'd flown Skyhoppers back on Tatooine. So, the hope is that Luke would be a better pilot than Ezra here. When the Death Star arrived at Yavin, a skirmish would happen, where Obi-Wan would communicate to Luke, and he would take his 1 in a million shot to destroy the Death Star, killing all of its crew, Tarkin, Yularen, and Thrawn too. When the celebration commenced, it was nothing short of pandemonium. Ezra hoped to see his family, but they wouldn't be seen in the celebration. Luke and Han would receive their medals, and then the rebels would pick up and ditch Yavin 4. They needed to. The rebels needed a place to relocate, and after some time they would find themselves on Hoth. It was reported that the rebels had discovered the location. During the build-up to this time, Ezra spent time with his new friend group, Chewie, Leia, Han, and Luke. Obi-Wan also began his instruction for Luke, which Ezra helped Luke with. Because Obi-Wan was present all the time, he decided that now was the best time to do so, and so he told Luke and Leia that they were twins. He still didn't disclose that Vader was their father, being that he believed Anakin Skywalker had died. Leia and Luke would get their respective time training, and Ezra would lend his lightsaber to Leia so that she could use it, making their bond tighter than the bond between her and Han. Solo was happy to see that Luke and Leia were siblings, but he did find some annoyance on how close Ezra was to Leia. But he couldn't relate on the same level they could. He and Chewie were the only ones who could use the Force at the moment, and it's not like he didn't believe the Force was hokey religions and all that anymore. Han didn't share his feelings about the matter and just kept the status quo because truthfully, he didn't know if he was really ready to be interested in a romantic connection, and he wasn't sure of Ezra's intentions, but they definitely didn't seem romantic on the surface. When the large group of rebels moved to Hoth, Ezra would have the joy of his life. When the Falcon landed, it was one of the last ships to arrive on Hoth. Ezra would exit the vessel to see the ghost. His heart shot to the top of his chest. He ran out of the Falcon looking for them. Luke and Leia watched their friend. Ezra was only a couple days older than them, but he always seemed a lot more mature since they met him. He was now acting like a little kid who lost their parents in a store. But ever since his real parents died, the ghost was his family. As he entered the hangar bay, he turned and saw Zeb. The tall Lasat called him by the name Kid, and Ezra ran forward and the two of them embraced each other. He missed Zeb so much. While they were hugging, Ezra's name was called by a female voice. He knew this voice and turned around to see the flashy colors of Sabine's armor. She took her helmet off and was almost knocked off her feet. He couldn't be happier in the moment, even seeing Chopper, who was right next to Sabine. When Ezra and Sabine let go of each other, Ezra said he had one question, and before anyone could actually hear his question, Kanan's voice echoed out, saying that they were right here. Ezra held himself together, trying not to burst into a bubble of tears, and then it all burst when he turned around. It turns out there was another member of the Ghost crew, Spectre 8. Ezra's eyes streamed with tears. He couldn't even run over to them. It was too much. Zeb and Sabine got by his sides, and the other three walked up to him, very excited and very happy to see him. Ezra apologized profusely for leaving them, for abandoning them, promising to never do it again, but none of them were upset with him. They didn't hold resentment or anger towards him, they were just so happy to see him again. They got together in a massive group hug, and when they slowly broke off, Ezra told them he wouldn't go anywhere without them. He was being a little unrealistic, but truthfully he felt that way. They knew what he meant, and they understood. They told him that all they ever cared about was his safety. Collectively as a group, they could be upset, they could be mad, or even angry that he left, but they couldn't wish anything but the best for him. Some days were hard, worrying if he had been captured by the Empire. Other days, incredibly painful, fearful that he'd been killed. Some days were filled with hope that he could find his happiness, and the rest, they wondered if he still thought about them. With cracks in his voice, he told them every day he thought about them, every day he missed them. His journey may have been leading him astray from them, but he always dreamed about coming home. He now was home. Wherever they were, Kanan, Hera, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper, that's where home was. He told them that, and he meant it. They would spend their time catching up and introducing Ezra to Jacen Syndulla, Hera and Kanan's son. The rebels, with 5 Jedi, almost felt empowered. Of course, out of 10,000 Jedi, they came across a couple Jedi in their time, with Kanan being one of the few constants. Kanan was also floored when he realized that Obi-Wan Kenobi had survived the Purge. For 2 more years, the rebels would operate out of Hoth's Echo base. During this, Hera would move the Ghost along with Jacen off-world for a short stint of time. This would have her, Luke, and Kanan going on a journey to visit an old friend of theirs. Well, not really a friend, but someone they worked with before, Lando. While Ezra, Ben, and Leia would be left with the Phantom, which after the Battle of Hoth, they would use it to go to Dagobah. Han, Zeb, Chewie, Sabine, and the droids ended up stuck on the Falcon and getting followed to Bespin, where their friends were already there. A small detachment from the Empire arrived at Bespin, and they were there to set a trap for the Falcon, which Lando was forced to take, but because his friends were there temporarily, he gifted them the supplies the Falcon needed and sent them away before the Imperial detachment could arrive. The Ghost crew abandoned Cloud City to intercept the Falcon. Attaching 2 ships together, they dumped all the supplies they needed to fix the hyperdrive and then departed. Boba Fett, who was trailing the Falcon, never caught wind of this incident because he was staying at a distance to ensure he wasn't caught, and then when the Ghost came to the Falcon, he split off to ensure he wasn't seen. When he came back, he told the Empire that Solo was still heading towards Bespin. Han and Chewie fixed a hyperdrive with the help of Zeb and Sabine. When they were finished, they had just arrived at the planet and then boom, they jumped the hyperspace. On Dagobah, Ezra and Leia's bond was growing tighter, especially as they bonded with their training under Yoda. For Leia, she was picking up on this bond between her and Ezra, and while part of her was still attracted to Han because, well, Han is Han, she couldn't deny that there was something between her and Ezra. On the other hand, Ezra was completely oblivious to this. When he first met Sabine, there was an attraction there. As they got older, it's sad, but having spent so much time away from her and the Ghost, there was no real room for romantic feelings to develop, even at the unlikely chance that anything would happen. Ezra, at the same time, had a thing with Leia. He simply enjoyed having Leia around him for just the simplicity of her company, nothing much more than that. Training with Yoda helped the 2 young Jedi progress their training even more. Kanan and Luke were brought to Dagobah thanks to Ezra's call to Hera. The reason Hera was okay with bringing Jacen here is because she was down the ship with Jacen, and the ship wouldn't be tracked by the Empire. Win-win. Without a confrontation on Bespin, Vader would put a bounty out on Boba for having failed and seemingly lied to the Empire. He liked keeping Boba around because Boba reminded him of Rex in a weird, they-all-sound-alike way, but he had this rule for all bounty hunters, and he couldn't play favorites. That made him look weak. The Falcon, on the other hand, would regroup with the Rebel fleet on the outskirts of the known galaxy near a proto-star at the location called Haven. It was a simple code name, but the Falcon was able to regroup, and they learned where the others were, finishing their Jedi training. Kanan was less shocked about Yoda because Ezra had spoken to Yoda before on Lothal, but Ezra, Leia, Luke, and Kanan all completed different aspects of their training with both Obi-Wan and Yoda by their sides. A chance for the Jedi Order's revival seemed even more likely than ever before. With the Alliance safe, their friends safe, and the Jedi in its greatest peak since their fall, hope was beginning to restore itself. It was also at this point that Jacen showed signs of being able to use the Force, which was something Hera was slightly concerned about, especially being around Jedi. But she did trust Kanan that he wouldn't resort back to the ways of the Jedi, especially since the old ways didn't suit him so well anyways. The trouble for the aging Jedi was what they should do when the training for the young ones were finished. Should they rejoin them, or should they just stay in hiding? Obi-Wan was much more optimistic in leaving Dagobah once the children were finished training, but Yoda was still unsure. The end of their training came fast, and the 4 Jedi were all now approaching some of their peaks. Ironically, Yoda saw similarities in Ezra to Windu, so he taught the boy how to use Vapad and Shatterpoint. Yoda typically didn't disperse such information, and he was, honestly, a bit too afraid of giving such knowledge to the Skywalker twins, especially after Anakin. Being that Ezra drifted away from the path of the Jedi but never became a Sith, he decided he was worthy at this point of the knowledge. When the training was done, they all, even Yoda and Obi-Wan, returned to the fleet at Haven. When they arrived, the demeanor of the group had changed. Leia had feelings for Ezra, and she didn't exactly know how to properly convey them. It was a change within the dynamic of the group of Jedi because she was interested in him, and it made her feel awkward and act awkwardly around him. Not to mention, when she first started training, she used his lightsaber, and when the time came, he showed her how to craft her own lightsaber, which made her awkwardness a little subtle, but noticeable. While there was some chemistry that could form, they couldn't focus on it. New information about a second Death Star was available, and the Alliance needed its heroes. Well, they came ready. The detachments went as such. General Solo would take General Organa, Chewie, Luke, Ezra, and Rex to the surface. General Syndulla would be in charge of the fleet. Sabine had to go back to Kranos to help her mother, so she took Jason and the Phantom with her, leaving Kanan, Chopper, and Zeb to man the weapons on the Ghost for Hera. All seemed to fit perfect. The Falcon, on the other hand, wouldn't sit out. Ever since the incident on Bespin, Lando was thrown out of town and he made friends with another pirate named Hondo Anaka. The two of them would be manning the Millennium Falcon. While Lando had shown his mettle for the Alliance, he hadn't the time in the previous 6 months to prove himself worthy as a general. The groups broke up, and when the ground unit got to the ground, Ezra was able to find himself some Imperial Scout gear, and he put it on and would report back with intel on the Imperial troops. While Ezra was out, he was able to get the code stuff for the shield generator and get them back to Rex and Han before he was captured by Vader. Sidious could feel the light rising, and he wanted to see which he could kill and which he could turn. Especially someone like Ezra was something Vader knew to bring to his master, a powerful young Force user who likely had little experience with resisting the dark side. Ezra was sent to the Emperor's throne room alone, while Vader continued the hunt for Luke Skywalker. He didn't even know about Leia, but he did know that Luke Skywalker was his son. Luke and Leia learned of Ezra's capture because of a random transmission that was sent, saying that if the rebels continued their attack, their friend would be killed. Luke and Leia decided to surrender themselves to Vader, so they trusted their rebels to finish the job down here on the ground and in space. Vader, seeing the two Jedi, was confused at first and didn't connect the dots, so he just brought him to the Emperor's throne room. When they arrived, Ezra looked beaten, his eyes had bags under them, and he was kneeling in front of the Emperor. Sidious had Ezra's lightsaber nestled gently on his chair. The two Skywalker children stood before the Emperor, and he was planning on tempting them. Truthfully, it'd be the prize to have 3 new students to replace Vader with, likely 2 considering Ezra was surprisingly resilient to the dark side. When the rebels arrived, Palpatine simply coaxed the 2 Skywalker children, showing them the destruction of the Alliance fleet. The Death Star filed a single reactor ignition, and it blasted through a winged MC-80. The Jedi were all taken aback, but Palpatine shook his head, holding the lightsaber of Ezra Bridger and pointing it towards his back, telling them that if they moved, he would kill their friend. Ezra told them to not listen to Sidious. The defeat of the Sith was much more important. Sidious resented the Jedi for saying such things. It made his skin crawl and it made his anger rise, but he allowed them to play hero. The Jedi all waited patiently, looking for their opportunity to strike. Palpatine kept edging them closer and closer to the darkness. Ezra wasn't the concern. It was Luke and Leia. Neither of them had a run-in with the dark side before. It could be their undoing here. Luke and Leia didn't budge, so Ezra did. He could sense the tension in Luke and Leia, especially Leia. Her resentment for Vader was much greater than Luke's, and she was on the cusp of killing Vader and then Palpatine for doing everything he did, plus what he was doing right now in threatening Ezra. Silence filled the room, aside from the few blasts outside the throne room from the ensuing battle. Leia reached out her arm, grabbing Ezra's blade with the Force and pulling it. Luke spun around, grabbing his blade from Vader's hand and igniting it as well. Sidious wasn't stupid. He flung the blade at Leia, and Ezra jumped up as he was shot with electricity, which sent him flying across the room. Leia was smacked in the face with the weapon before turning around to see Palpatine set it down next to him. Leia's blade ignited, and Sidious grinned. He found his target. Vader would deal with Skywalker. He would deal with the princess from Alderaan. Ezra looked up and saw Leia rushing the Emperor, and he didn't buckle. He wasn't afraid. This is exactly what he wanted. Ezra couldn't let her turn to the dark side. He got up, and as his feet hit the ground, Leia was blocking lightning coming at her. On the other hand, Luke and Vader were exchanging blows. Their fight was intense. Luke, still having not heard the big reveal, wasn't playing nice. Ezra pulled his lightsaber to his hands and ignited it, joining Leia, and Palpatine simply smiled, throwing Ezra into Leia and wiping her legs out from under her. He stopped his lightning and rose to his feet, looking down at the 2 young Jedi. He told Leia that she was extremely powerful. She'd be of good use on the dark side of the Force. If she joined him, she would know true power. Ezra got himself between her and the Emperor, telling Leia that it wouldn't reward her no matter what she did. She couldn't buckle to it. Sidious's scowl returned and told Ezra that he had interfered for the last time. Ezra was shocked with lightning as Sidious stood over him and shooting as much as he could into Ezra's back. He turned and told Leia to join him, or Ezra would die right here in front of her. She looked at him and then to Vader. He told Leia to assist her brother and become the newest apprentices, and he would let Ezra live. Leia turned back, and then Palpatine resumed his electricity. She abided. Ezra cried out, but he was silenced, being dragged back to Palpatine's side, where he placed the young Jedi in midair, taking his lightsaber back into his hands and grinning. Ezra looked at Leia run after Vader. He didn't hear Palpatine. He was busy defending himself, trying to place his sentiment on his son, when Leia's blade blasted through his back and he was completely caught off guard, being driven to the ground. Her face was covered in anger. Vader wasn't dead, but might as well have been. When she turned around, she looked at Sidious. He was holding Ezra's blade and preparing to ignite it. Sidious nodded his head, suggesting that she execute Vader, but Luke didn't believe it was the Jedi way. Even though he didn't know about the whole father thing, Vader should be punished for what his crimes were to the galaxy. Leia didn't even look at her brother, raising her blade up ready to strike down, and as her blade flew, so did Luke's, blocking her strike. She looked at him with rage. He told her it wasn't the Jedi way. She was torn. All she wanted to do was save Ezra. She couldn't let him die, especially not because she couldn't handle it. Luke nodded at his sister subtly, telling her to make it look good. It took a minute for the words to process, but when they did, she threw her arm out with the force and Luke was pushed back. Leia slid her blade across Vader's chest and killing him instantly, rushing forward to attack Luke. She jumped up at Luke and their blades began to clash. Sidious simply smiled and told Ezra that no matter who won, he would die. Ezra's face filled with anger, but then he pushed it away. He looked at Sidious dead in the eyes and told him that everything he was would crumble beneath that of a couple Jedi, not even a tenth of his age. Ezra wished him a peaceful death because he would only continue to roll in his grave. Sidious grabbed Ezra's blade and rammed it into his chest. The young Jedi winced. He accepted his fate. And while Sidious rejoiced in the pleasure of killing a Jedi, Ezra put his hands on his weapon, closing his eyes and forcing it out of himself as he thrusted it into Palpatine's head. Palpatine was too unprepared that by the time the blade connected, he was unable to save himself. Ezra fell to the ground, and both Luke and Leia felt it. Their plan was to distract Palpatine until he bought their betrayal, and then they could kill him. But that seemingly wasn't going to happen. They both ran over to Ezra, taking a deep breath. Leia slid under him and put him onto her lap. Luke was right behind her. Ezra told him that it was done. He coughed and lifted up his hilt, his lightsaber, and said to them to give it to his family, telling them that he loved them. Before he said another word, he took a deep breath. Leia leaned over and begged him not to go. Ezra just simply smiled and told her it was okay. They finished what they needed to finish. The mission was over. They could free the galaxy from oppression now. She told Ezra that she just wanted more time. He shook his head and told her that the time was already theirs now. Before he let go, she gave him a kiss. His smile faded as his body slowly slumped. The moment he became one with the cosmic force, Kanan felt it in his heart. He stopped firing, and Hera asked what was wrong. He looked over his shoulder and a tear slid down his cheek. He told her that Ezra was gone. Her heart broke. She couldn't believe it. The battle crept to an end. Luke and Leia escaped the Death Star with Ezra so they could at the very least give him a formal funeral and a goodbye. When celebration on Endor came, he'd be burned. Obi-Wan, Kanan, Leia, Luke, and Yoda would be the Jedi to light the fire. Sabine was able to get to Endor to say her goodbyes as well. While the celebration commenced, Kanan, Hera, Zeb, Sabine, Han, Luke, Chewie, and Leia would all have their time to say their final goodbyes. A bittersweet ending to the story of Ezra Bridger. He may have never had the chance to see his people free, but Lothal, just like the rest of the galaxy, would see their freedom. A rise of the rebellion would see the fall of the Empire. Without an established leader like Thrawn or Palpatine, the system would crumble, Moffs and Admirals picking up fights with each other. The dream of a final order would be thwarted by Snoke clones tearing each other apart for the power they believed they deserved. The rest of the galaxy would see the heroes of victory rise up. The Jedi would remove themselves from the front lines and they would return to secrecy. Hera and Kanan would accompany this growth. Yoda's final resting place would be on Ossus, where Luke and Leia decided the temple should be. While Leia didn't let go of her friends, she had no interest in picking up a relationship with anyone after Ezra passed away. With Yoda gone, Kenobi would pass on all of his knowledge to the three Jedi before his time eventually came. Though before Kenobi disappeared, Cal Kestis would join the Order, he having a similar dynamic to that of Kanan, just with Merrin. Luke and Leia would go out into the galaxy and bring new students into the Order. This would lead Leia to find a little creature in his 50s. Because she found this creature before a Mandalorian did, she would bring Grogu to the Jedi Order on Ossus. Obi-Wan was in disbelief over his survival, but would use Grogu and Cal as a reference for the chances of there being more survivors in the galaxy. But none would come. Instead, the Order would rebuild itself, and Obi-Wan ironically would suggest and dissuade the Jedi from following the ancient texts, suggesting as a new generation they keep some traditions but choose what best fits a new galaxy, gesturing towards what Kanan had proven with Hera and Jacen. Maybe the old ways of the Jedi were simply too out of touch with the reality of the Force itself. In Ezra's honor, and every fallen Jedi before him, the Jedi would push forward down a path of redemption for an ever-changing galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvan Gaming, Jack Miller, Tristan, Darth Revan, Flynn Bassis, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Manny Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. Otherwise, I have nothing much else to say about the story other than I tried to make this really tie in together. I want to do some different things because there are some stories we've done lately with Ezra and Kanan being around during the time of the rebellion, and I really wanted to see Ezra's impact kind of just be removed because he's part of the reason why the Ghost Crew goes to Lothal, but like I feel like without him they wouldn't necessarily just go to Lothal, if that makes sense. I think they would go there to look for him, but aside from that, they wouldn't be there. So Ezra doesn't really strike me as someone that would go as far as Anakin did. I think he would go far, but not that far. I don't think he would go into the Asajj, the Anakin, the Maul territory. I think he could really play with the dark side, and I think he would become more of a dark side user, maybe again like Windu, and that was intentionally put in there. Subtext matters. That being said, that whole point of me saying Windu, like being reminded of Windu, that's kind of the vibe I get from Ezra. If you feel the same way, then you know. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.